Japan is the future. It's the ultimate place of convenience. Their society strives for efficiency. I am still stunned by the ever-evolving culture that opens my eyes in more ways than you can imagine. It's electric, it's sexy, it's tasty, it's confusing, but above all, it's futuristic. The Japanese are innovators.
Japan is truly an incredible cultural treasure, with its tea ceremonies and the art of calligraphy. And let's not forget about Japanese pop culture, with otakus as the highlight, passionate about anime, manga, video games, and fictional characters. Additionally, the famous Harajuku Festival in Tokyo is a meeting point for fashion and youth culture enthusiasts. However, today we will approach a slightly different perspective on Japan. Recently, an article came out on BBC highlighting some issues faced by the country. We want to explore these interesting topics and show you a side of Japan that you may not be familiar with. In the video description, you will find the link to the full article titled How Japan Went from Country of the Future to Stuck in the Past, written by Rupert Wingfield Hayes, BBC correspondent in Tokyo. Let's delve into these intriguing issues and discover how Japan faces challenges amidst its rich culture and traditions. But before we begin, I would like to ask you to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. This is crucial for us to reach the milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Together, we can make this channel even more engaging and filled with informative content. As soon as you move in, your new home is worth less than what you paid for it. And after you finish paying off your mortgage in 40 years, it is worth almost nothing. It bewildered me when I first moved here as a correspondent for the BBC 10 years on. As I prepared to leave, it was still the same. This is the world's third largest economy. It's a peaceful, prosperous country with the longest life expectancy in the world, the lowest murder rate, little political conflict, a powerful passport. America and Europe once feared the Japanese economic juggernaut much the same way they feared China's growing economic might today. But the Japan the world expected never arrived. In the late 1980s, Japanese people were richer than Americans. Now they earn less than Britons. For decades, Japan has been struggling with a sluggish economy, held back by a deep resistance to change and a stubborn attachment to the past. Now, its population is both aging and shrinking. Japan is stuck. What you need to understand about this is that it's not a case of things losing their value for no reason. It's a serious problem of currency devaluation. Let's say you bought your house on a mortgage 20 years ago, and today its value is much lower than the price you originally intended to pay when you took out the loan, simply because the currency has lost its value. Indeed, there was a Japanese real estate bubble caused by various factors. This bubble had its growth period from 1986 to 1991, during which property and stock market prices were greatly inflated. The bubble was characterized by a rapid acceleration of asset prices, overheated economic activity, uncontrolled money supply, and credit expansion. Specifically, excessive confidence and speculation regarding asset and stock prices were closely associated with the overly loose monetary policy of the time. It's important to highlight that Japan experienced a significant period of economic growth after World War II, particularly in the 1960s, known as the Japanese economic miracle. This growth was driven by a series of factors, such as the strong influence of the United States, which was concerned about the influence of the Soviet Union and China in Japan. As a result, the U.S. exerted significant influence over Japanese politics, pressuring the government and businesses for economic growth, which led to great success in the global market. In early 1992, this price bubble burst, and Japan's economy stagnated, leading to a prolonged recession and its current 30-year stagnation. Furthermore, the 0% interest rate has led to extremely high levels of Japanese domestic debt. This wouldn't be a problem if the U.S. Central Bank hadn't increased interest rates to 4%. To quickly explain the effect of this, which is the total devaluation of the Japanese yen, we need to understand that, since Japan cannot raise its interest rates due to the risk of its debt exploding, they find themselves cornered and forced to print a large amount of money. This results in the expansion of the monetary base to buy its own debt. However, during this process, and with interest rates unable to be raised, there is a significant credit flight as the yen is cheaper and can be acquired without additional costs for conversion into dollars, which devalues the Japanese currency. A clear example of this is inflation, which went from -1% to 3% within a few months. You might be wondering how, then, in this scenario, the stagnant and inflated Japanese economy doesn't collapse. The answer is simple. Japan remains a country with a very strong and established cultural and industrial base globally. It is for this reason that few people are even aware that such a serious problem exists. From New York to Sydney, ambitious parents were imploring their offspring to learn Japanese. I had wondered whether I had made a mistake plumping for Chinese. The perspective that Japan would surpass the United States economically was not only shared by Rupert Wingfield Hayes, but also by many others during the heyday of the cyberpunk science fiction genre in the 1980s. During that time, Japan was experiencing significant economic growth, which led people to believe that the country would become the most influential nation in the world. As a result, movies and works of fiction portrayed major American cities as if they were Tokyo, with many Japanese influences, because it was believed to be the future. I myself grew up dreaming of that future as a fan of these genres. American and European parents even enrolled their children in Japanese language classes at an early age, believing that Japanese would become as influential as English, and that their children would work for major Japanese megacorporations in the future. This vision reflected the general belief that Japan was on its way to becoming the leading global economic power. Japan still feels like Japan, and not a reproduction of America. It's why the world is so thrilled by all things Japanese, from the powder snow to the fashion. The geeks and oddballs love it for its wonderful weirdness, but it also has alt-right admirers for refusing immigration and maintaining the patriarchy. It is often described as a country that has successfully become modern without abandoning the ancient. There is some truth to this, but I'd argue the modern is more of an ear. When COVID struck, Japan closed its borders. Even permanent foreign residents were excluded from returning. I called up the foreign ministry to ask why foreigners who'd spent decades in Japan, had homes and businesses here, were being treated like tourists. The response was blunt. They are all foreigners. 150 years after it was forced to open its doors, Japan is still skeptical, even fearful of the outside world. I remember sitting in a village hall on the Boso Peninsula on the far side of Tokyo Bay. I was there because the village was listed as endangered, one of 900 in Japan. The old men gathered in the hall were concerned. Since the 1970s, they had watched young people leave for jobs in cities. Of the 60 left, there was only one teenager and no children. Who will look after our graves when we are gone? One elderly gentleman lamented. Taking care of the spirits is serious business in Japan. But to me, a native of southeast England, the death of this village seemed absurd. It was surrounded by picture postcard rice paddies and hills covered in dense forest. Tokyo was less than 2 hours' drive away. This is such a beautiful place, I said to them. I'm sure lots of people would love to live here. How would you feel if I brought my family to live here? The air in the room went still. The men looked at each other in silent embarrassment. Then one cleared his throat and spoke, with a worried look on his face. Well, you would need to learn our way of life. It wouldn't be easy. The village was on the path to extinction, yet the thought of it being invaded by outsiders was somehow worse. A third of Japanese people are over 60, making Japan home to the oldest population in the world after tiny Monaco. It is recording fewer births than ever before. By 2050, it could lose a fifth of its current population, yet its hostility to immigration has not wavered. Only about 3% of Japan's population is foreign-born, compared to 15% in the UK. In Europe and America, right-wing movements point to it as a shining example of racial purity and social harmony. If you want to see what happens to a country that rejects immigration as a solution to falling fertility, Japan is a good place to start, but change feels distant. In part, it's because of a rigid hierarchy that determines who holds the levers of power. For the Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, which has governed the country to this day since its founding in the mid-1950s by Nobasa Kishi, who was a cabinet member during World War II, was arrested by the Americans as a suspected war criminal and escaped by force. This is good because it means that rural and elderly votes count more. When this older generation passes, changes will be inevitable. But I'm not sure if that means Japan will become more open or liberal. Younger Japanese are less likely to be married or have children, but they are also less likely to speak a foreign language or to have studied overseas than their parents or grandparents. Although Japan is known for its rich culture, advanced technology, and unique traditions, it also faces an issue regarding diversity and acceptance of people from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. To better understand why this is the case, let's delve into the country's historical context. For many centuries, Japan maintained a policy of isolation from the outside world, known as sakoku, which had a significant impact on Japanese society and its perception of foreigners. Japan is widely known for its homogeneous culture, where national identity and social cohesion are highly valued. This can lead to attitudes of mistrust and resistance towards foreigners, especially when it comes to issues of employment, interracial marriage, and social inclusion. Although Japan has seen an increase in the number of foreigners living and working in the country in recent decades, immigration is still relatively low compared to other developed nations. This can be attributed to restrictive immigration policies and a cultural preference for maintaining homogeneity. Xenophobia in Japan can result in difficulties for foreigners seeking employment, housing, and social integration. There are reports of discrimination in various areas of society, including access to services and racial discrimination.
So can you imagine yourself living in Japan in the future again?
I think maybe no.
What's the reason leave Japan?
I'm starting my business back in my country. I was trying to actually start business here, but then since I'm foreigner, I'm not allowed to do other job other than my visa, like which is working visa. So yeah, that's why I'm going back to my country to start my business.
Then the second one is having zero expectations of the country. You love manga, anime, or I don't know. You have your own image of the country. So when you come here and the country don't really fulfill what you think, your image of the country, you're gonna get like disappointed. You are not gonna feel like you belong here. Because I've had friends from my university who came here as exchange student, and they had this experience. They were like, Japan is not what I think.
Also, like they did fantasize
Yeah.
Japan
They had, like,
because of
a-
anime and stuff.
Yeah, or whatever the thing they liked. They really like hyped up the country. So I came here without having like any expectations. I was like, let's see what happens. Let's see how it goes. That's why I think I'm now really happy with my life in Japan, and I really want to come back.
You mentioned. Can you imagine yourself living in Japan in the future again for the long term? Maybe years.
A year? A year?
Years.
Years? No, absolutely not.
Why?
Because again, like I'm not Japanese. You know,
You will never be Japanese.
And I
That's
will-
what people saying.
exactly, and you will never be Japanese. Doesn't matter how much Japanese you speak, or if you get naturalized as a citizen, it doesn't matter. But I appreciate Japan. So that's why I come here all the time. It's a huge blessing to be able to come here and there.
For many, Japan is seen as a perfect place with an organized society, low crime rates, and high living standards. This idealization can lead some people to support restrictive immigration policies out of fear that the arrival of foreigners may negatively impact the country. It is understandable that individuals would prefer to maintain the idealized image of Japan in their minds, choosing not to confront the challenges of immigration. This choice reflects the desire to preserve the perception of a perfect Japan, even if it means not fulfilling the dream of living there. And yet, despite all this, I am going to miss Japan, which inspires in me both enormous affection and the not-so-occasional bout of exasperation. After a decade here, I have got used to the way Japan is, and come to accept the fact that it is not about to change. Yes, I worry about the future, and Japan's future will have lessons for the rest of us. In the age of artificial intelligence, fewer workers could drive innovation. Japan's aged farmers may be replaced by intelligent robots. Large parts of the country could return to the wild. Will Japan gradually fade into irrelevance or reinvent itself? My head tells me that to prosper, a new Japan must embrace change, but my heart aches at the thought of it losing the things that make it so special. So, the question arises about the feasibility of adopting more open immigration policies as a solution, or if it is more appropriate to maintain restrictions to preserve cultural identity. Do the Japanese prefer to remain isolated, even if it means running the risk of falling into ostracism? The issue of immigration in Japan is complex and involves a series of factors. Finding a balance between cultural preservation and openness to the outside world is a significant challenge. However, it is essential to maintain open dialogue and seek solutions that address both the country's economic needs and cultural concerns. Finding this balance can allow Japan to thrive in a globalized world while maintaining its unique identity. But given the country's economic issues and significant social problems, it seems that Japan has not achieved the idealized vision portrayed in the science fiction stories of the 80s.